Welcome to the Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we provide a daily view on world markets and the global economy. I'm Tal Henrik. Coming up on the program, Mauricio Marci, the center-right mayor of Buenos Aires, won presidential elections. Marci said he wants to reduce the state's role in the economy and promised more pro-business policies in South America's second-largest economy. And after hundreds of votes and several dramatic moments, Israel's Knesset passed the 2015-16 state budget. According to Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon, the new budget focuses on child support, anti-poverty program, and education. But first, let's start with today's headlines. Global stocks fell for the first time in 6 days as the sell-off in commodities continued. The Shanghai Composite finished down 0.5%, Hong Kong's Hang Seng down almost 0.4%, while Australia's ASX reached month-long highs up almost 0.4%. Japan's Nikkei was closed for a holiday, and over in Europe, London's FTSE was down 0.64%, Germany's DAX down 0.34%, and France's CAC down almost 0.8%. U.S. shares fared a bit better. The Nasdaq was up 0.6%, and the S&P up almost 0.4%. In corporate news, Pfizer agreed to a reverse takeover by Allergan in what will be a $150 billion M&A. The New York-based Pfizer will be swallowed by the smaller Allergan, which will allow Pfizer to domicile its corporate headquarters in Dublin, Ireland, where the tax rate is 5% less than in the U.S. Pfizer has been lobbying hard and successfully for tax reform, urging that it was at a competitive disadvantage, paying a much higher rate than its pharmaceutical competitors around the world. And Europe on Sunday promised additional aid to Balkan states in their attempts to stem the flow of migrants arriving in the continent. Speaking in Macedonia, President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, said that the European Union was committed to providing financial assistance to Turkey, African countries, but also to the Balkans. Hundreds of thousands of migrants have entered Macedonia this year from Greece, with the goal of trekking onwards through Serbia into the heart of Europe. Tusk, who was on a one-day visit to the country, also reiterated his support for the European Union's passport-free Schengen area.
If we are serious about saving Schengen and visa-free travel, we also need to be serious about helping the countries on the front line, such as your country.
The UK will boost Britain's military equipment budget by $18 billion, the latest in a range of government commitments to fight terrorism and other security threats. On Monday, UK Prime Minister David Cameron presented to lawmakers a full £178 billion spending plan for Britain's military over the next decade. Cameron said that the increase in defense funding will allow the country to tackle the threats posed by ISIS, instability in the Middle East, the crisis in Ukraine, and cyber attacks. And leaders from 16 Asia-Pacific countries agreed on Sunday to increase efforts to finalize a regional free trade agreement, the RCEP. The RCEP is a proposed collective free trade agreement between the 10 member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and 6 countries with which it has individual FTAs: Australia, China, India, Japan, New Zealand, and the Republic of Korea. In a statement released Sunday in Kuala Lumpur, where the 10th East Asia Summit was taking place, the leaders urged negotiators who have been trying to put together a deal since 2013 to reach a deal by next year. And Israel's Spacecom lost contact with its Russian-built satellite Amos 5 on Saturday, causing a slowdown in the company's customer service capabilities, particularly in African countries. After the company's notification to the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, its stock price plummeted by about 30%. Loss of contact with the Amos 5 resulted in the loss of about a third of Spacecom's revenues. Opposition candidate Mauricio Marci is about to become Argentina's next president after a runoff vote that marks the end of a political dynasty. So what are the financial implications of his election? In the next report.
Conservative challenger Mauricio Macri captured the presidency in Argentina's runoff election over the weekend. His campaign, which took aim at Argentina's hurting economy, the third largest on the continent, and captured an array of voters with its Let's Change slogan, led him to a win with just over 51% of the vote.
I want to be the president of those who don't give up. I want to be the president who fights against narco-trafficking and doesn't allow bribes for politicians, judges, civil servants. I want to be the president who will put this country to work.
One of the main election issues was soy. For years, growers in the world's #3 soybean exporter have been stung by a 35% tax on all international shipments. Both candidates promised to reduce this tax. Daniel Scioli said he would cut the levy to 25% on his first day in office, while Macri promised to cut the export tax to 30% in 2016 and by 5 percentage points every year after.
From December 10th, we are eliminating withholdings from all the regional economies. And for soy, it will be down from 35% to 25%.
After 12 years in power between her and her late husband, outgoing President Cristina Fernández Kirchner was held in high regard by the poor and working class because of widespread welfare programs and heavy business regulations. Their legacy of pulling the country out of the 2001 economic collapse was the mantle carried by her party's candidate, Daniel Scioli, the outgoing governor of Buenos Aires province. But in the end, he conceded defeat.
The people have chosen a new president, the engineer Mauricio Macri, who I have just spoken to on the telephone. I wished him success for the good of our country.
President-elect Macri, who comes from a wealthy background, was the president of a famous Buenos Aires football team, and he has promised to work to attract international investors by taking apart many of the regulatory policies of the previous government.
Israel's Knesset has passed the 2015-16 state budget. The vote took place after lawmakers voted on over 1,500 different pages of objections, which required over 420 different votes. And here's the results.
Late last week, after more than 12 hours of overnight voting and deep schisms, Israel passed its 2015-2016 budget. The total amount sits at over $200 billion for the two-year allocation, which sets a nearly 3% deficit as percentage of GDP, which could mean an increase in the debt-to-GDP ratio for the first time since the global financial crisis. The budget, which passed by a razor-thin vote of 61 to 59, sees the Ministry of Education get a $1.7 billion infusion and the Health Ministry get just over $1 billion more than it had been working with. But much of the focus in the Knesset was on an item that was supposed to compel the ultra-Orthodox Jewish population of Israel to serve in the army, but which was postponed at least until 2023, a cause for debate.
My son's defense minister, his highest commander, has sold him out over all sorts of coalition agreements.
The way to get to equality is not through force. It's not through a law that threatens to send military police to drag out yeshiva students.
Meanwhile, the Joint List Party, made up primarily of Arab members of parliament, called the budget racist and criticized the ballooning defense portfolio, as well as the focus on settlements. For example, the Education Ministry's nearly $20 million to provide security for settlements around East Jerusalem. But Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon sees the budget as being a major win for those in need.
If, when I was a kid, Yair Lapid or somebody that cuts child welfare subsidies was finance minister, I wouldn't have shoes. Nor would I have a backpack or new clothes.
Israel has been running for nearly a year without a budget, with the government operating on a month-to-month framework based on the previous year's spending. The passage of this financial plan sets up the current government to stay in place at least through 2017 without coming apart due to budget-centered infighting.
Joining us in the studio now to break down the new state budget here in Israel is Chen Herzog. Hi, Chief Economist at BDO Israel. Thank you for coming here. Chen, as we just saw, the new budget will include child support budgets. Billion shekel will go to public housing, and for the first time, unemployment benefits to self-employed. What are the challenges of this budget?
Well, there are a lot of details in the budget, a lot of controversy, but you want to understand the challenges of this budget. Actually, any budget, there are two main issues at stake, two main issues at controversy. One is how to increase our standard of living, how to stimulate growth, and the second is how to reduce inequality, what we call welfare economics. And the key challenge here, the key debate in every budget decision is which is more important. I can give you two examples. For example, if you reduce corporate tax, then you increase or stimulate growth, but you don't do anything to improve inequality situation. On the other hand, if you give more child support benefits, then you, of course, reduce inequality.
You address the masses.
But you don't do anything to stimulate growth.
Does it have to be either or? Any measures that address both?
Yeah, this is the key issue. The key challenge, I think, of a good policy is to address both. And unfortunately, we haven't seen enough of the measures that address both in this budget. For example, public transportation. Investment in public transportation is an investment that both stimulates the economy and reduces inequality.
Inequality, yeah.
Or, for example, extended daycare. If we invest in extended daycare, extended school day for the kids, and coordinate the school day hours with the work day hours, then we stimulate growth and we reduce inequality. Unfortunately, the decision was to postpone the extended school day to 2021.
Now, speaking about postponing things, I want to talk to you about the process of, passing this budget, because it took us forever for the Israeli government to do so. Is the government now safe? Because we know how challenging and how difficult it is political-wise to pass a budget.
Yes, well, frankly, the first budget the government passes in Israel is always the easier one. So it looked like it was difficult, but that was easy because the details were already agreed upon within the coalition agreements. And the key challenge for this government will be to pass the next budget. And with a majority of just one member, I don't think that there are many politicians that will put their money that will be able to do it in the current coalition.
And another thing, in order to finance everything that we've just heard of in this last report, Israel's new budget also means increasing Israel's deficit from 2% to 2.5% of the state's GDP. So are we living in this world in which, addressing inequality is more important than looking to help the next generations?
Well, it really depends what this deficit is used for. What is a deficit? When we're talking about government deficit, it's actually a loan that we take today, and our kids or the next generation have to pay back. And depends what you do with this loan. If you take this loan and just consume it and spend it, then you're right. We're spending today and we're leaving it for our kids to pay for it. But if we're taking this loan, this deficit, and we're building infrastructure, and we're building the light train in Israel, then we would say, okay, it's just fair enough that we invest today for an infrastructure that will also serve the next generations.
And we always were familiar with this, that a big share of Israel's budget always goes to Israel's security. And it is the case in this budget as well, right? But what makes Israeli public very, very furious about the military budget, the security budget, is first the budgetary pensions, and second, sometimes it's the involvement of the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox in the security effort.
Yeah, from an economic point of view, there are really two key issues. One is the pensions of the professional military, that it's a burden that's becoming more and more difficult, and it's not part of securing our defense expenses today. It's paying for the defense
it's
expenses.
A bill.
It's a bill we're paying for the previous years. And another problem is again, the inequality in terms of the burden. And from economic point of view today, that only about 50% of the population actually serves in the army, the fact that they are not being compensated for their service is a major source of inequality.
Are you talking about professional military? Is this something
I'm not talking about professional military. There are two separate things. One is if you're drafted, doesn't mean that you don't have to be paid for your service. And it doesn't mean that you have to go to a professional army, but there is drafting people and not paying them is actually similar to taxing them 100% income tax. And it's not fair that two young people, one goes to the army, he pays 100% income tax, and his brother or that doesn't go to the army and does a similar job, and he doesn't pay such a high tax rate.
I want to take you back for a second to the deficit topic, which we addressed before. Israel's Bank of Israel's governor, Karnit Plug, she has warned that a higher deficit might risk the financial market. So, is it just the government bending to populism on the expense of a secured market?
Well, I think it's the responsibility of the government to take into account wider a range of possibilities, of considerations than the central bank. The central bank is responsible for monetary stability, for inflation. It's not responsible for growth. It's not responsible for equality. So I think the government does right when it weighs the entire
Thank you so much, Chen Herzog.
spectrum.
We have to be done with these interesting words. That wraps up our show for today. Stay tuned every day for all your business coverage here. Thank you for watching.